Department and Literature at Harvard. She is pioneering the Spanish courses for Latino students and is the coordinator of the Romantic Languages and Literature initiatives on the teaching of Spanish as a heritage language at Harvard University. A native Spanish speaker from Mexico City, and a mother of two bilingual and bicultural teenage boys, Dr. Parra is also the founder and director of the Multilingual Family Resource Center. Please welcome Dr. Maria Luisa Parra.
Can you hear me here? Is this the microphone good? Okay, excellent, good. So thank you for the presentation, and as you heard, the word music or musician is not part of my profile. However, I wanna thank very much Patricia Zarate and the Berkeley Global Jazz Institute and all of you for being here to talk about the music inside Frida, but it's more reflection on the history of music in Mexico. And I'm going to start linking it with some of the themes that we have already heard in the presentations before, and with especially with Leo Blanco. So my background is in psychology and linguistics, but you have to know that I have a history with music too. And when I was talking to Patricia about what the theme of this presentation would be, she said, something that make the audience think outside the box. And I thought, well, that's a very good way to start thinking about what I'm going to be talking here, because I don't have a very happy history with music. I was educated in one of the schools that Leo Blanco mentioned, very European-centered, very strict. I play all the famous composers, Beethoven, that partiture, and of course Chopin. At some point I was so taken by it, but I was terrified by the metronomo, and I had nightmares every time they asked me to perform in my school as a teenage. The night before, I would be dreaming about not being able to get on school on time, sitting at the piano and forgetting what I was going to be playing. So it was a hard experience. And if I had been wearing a dress made with the clothing that Profe Omeneto was talking about, I probably would be all in one color of stress, probably gray and paralyzed, right? So my message, and I deeply regret that was the experience I had with playing music. Music is part of my life, and I love it, and I hear all kinds of music, but I can't play anymore because I forgot most of it, and it was such a tense environment. So I want to talk today about the life of Frida Kahlo and the role of music that had in her life, because she's someone, or was someone, that definitely lived outside the box. So, and I think that we can learn a lot of things through her experiences. But at the same time, I'm going to try to weave in examples of music that were part of this period of history in Mexico. I won't be able to do the pumpa pumpa that I know that Leo Blanco and Patricia can do so well, because I don't know how to do that, but I have music, samples of music, and we are going to try to take a trip in history. So in this presentation, we will explore the relationship between Frida Kahlo's life, her free spirit, and her art with the Mexican music of her time. We will reflect on the power of music and art to turn traumatic experiences into creative ones, to be shared with others and strengthen our sense of selves and community. So to give you an example of an idea of what this talk is going to be, I did my homework and some research about song structures. So I structure the talk according to like a song, and it's a weird song, a little too long. We have an introduction, we have different verse, and we have a verse on the revolution, Frida Kahlo, the accident, Diego, a new Mexican identity, the new Mexican staff, not staff people, but staff where you write music. And we're going to have some chorus lines along the presentation. All of them are ing verbs. I'm a linguist, so I had to do something with language here. And the first line is fighting and singing outside the European staff. So what I'm going to try to do with these chorus lines is to infuse a sense of progress and innovation that would happen within the structure of the verse. And you'll see a little bit more what I will be talking about. We have a bridge that has to do with Mexican women's narrative and how a group of friends that Frida had contributed to create a new narrative for Mexican women at the time. And the time we're talking about is the beginning of the 20th century, the first 40 years of the 20th century. And then we will have a coda where I will be showing, new possibilities that Frida gave through art. But I have used, tried to merge it with sounds, a new visual polyphony. I will have a helper throughout the presentation, and it's Miguel. If you have seen Coco, you know that he struggled to make music part of his life, and he was very constrained for his family's expectations, but finally he broke through. And part of that breakthrough took him to a world and the underworld, talking about Aztec culture, where he connected with all family members that had passed away but are pretty much alive in this underworld and are celebrated on the Day of the Dead. I am making this connection because Frida was someone very close to death throughout her life, from childhood to adulthood. And we can see in this piece of a mural from Diego Rivera that Diego Rivera is the small man here, like a boy. We have Frida, and then we have this skeleton called La Catrina that was designed, invented by the man here with the hat, Guadalupe Posada, in a time of great social and economic inequality in Mexico. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But Posada was so concerned about this inequality that he said, the only social equalizer we have is death. And it doesn't matter how rich or how poor we are all going to die. So this figure, La Catrina, became kind of a symbol of Mexican culture. And in few weeks, at the end of October, beginning of November, we are all going to see, even here in Boston, Catrinas everywhere. So there's a connection with Miguel and Frida. So let me start with the introduction. And here I'm going to talk about this man, Porfirio Diaz, who ruled Mexico for 30 years, end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. And Porfirio Diaz loved Europe. And you can see him here dressed in a very European fashion, kind of the Prussian army uniform. And he had a vision for Mexico that was pretty much imitating Europe. During his ruling, he designed and developed beautiful buildings, like the one that I'm showing here is the Palace of Bellas Artes, Fine Arts in Mexico. It's a marble, white, huge building, Art Deco inside. It's gorgeous. And there's many other buildings around Mexico City and other parts of the country that follow that European model in architecture. He was into culture, and at the time, Mexico City brought all this culture mainly from France. And, this is a kind of piece of a partitura where you can see that we're there into mazurka, the dances in these main elite places and circles of society. Yes?
Could you repeat again mazurka? You said?
To the mazurka.
Yeah, it's Polish dance.
Yes, of course. And
From France.
European, well, thank you. So, um, so this is an example of the setting of European music and culture that was being developing. Okay, let me show you an example of a waltz that wrote by Ricardo Castro, one of three composers that were leading the music scene at the time. So you can have an idea of this music. I don't know if is the volume working here? Let me see. Patricia, can somebody help me here with the music? Let's see. Oh.
Ahí sí lo aprieta. Aquí.
Let me see. No sé si es acá, maybe. Hold on. We have it here. It's connected there. Oh.
Can you try playing again?
I'm sorry?
Can you try playing?
Sure.
Again. Cannot play
Your
media.
funeral?
Ah, ya la máquina. A ver,
Well,
¿lo tienes en algún otro lugar que lo podamos buscar?
yeah, I mean, I can look at the internet,
Ya.
but it va a ser más. Okay.
¿Quieres mirarlo en internet?
So let me. Okay. So let's see if we can hear it. So you got an idea, and these three composers were, being part of a group of musicians that went to Europe to be educated. However, as I said, during the Porfiriato, there was a scenario of great social inequality, and while cities were being developed in architecture and culture, the countryside was really suffering from poverty, and people didn't like that. So there were politicians that start looking and pressuring Porfirio Diaz to change the situation. One of the main figures is the man on the left here. You can see him. It's Francisco I. Madero, who was the first president elected in Mexico after Porfirio Diaz. And then at the center we have Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata, who were caudillos, leaders of the revolution in different parts of the city of Mexico. It was a complicated 10-year crude revolution that spread throughout the country and had many implications. One of them was that campesinos, people working in the fields, decided to join the army and became fighters, right? And they form different bands following different caudillos and leaders, and it became a complicated situation and crude war, as I already said. However, it also gave space for new ways of partnership between men and women and creativity. And that's why I'm having these chorus of fighting and singing outside the European stuff. And I'm going to give you some examples of what happened. First of all, women joined the revolution as soldaderas, as part of the army. And they were leaving the home environment to follow men and to fight. But also, there were new ways of music that were developed, maybe following some of the European style and legacy, but with a new Mexican touch, meaning more grounded on popular music. So I can't play here, so you have to bear with me while I look for the song. So you can hear what happened to this music, and I don't. Okay. So we can see this video and see some images while we hear the music. And this is not my video, so it's just the best version of the song right now.
En lo alto de la abrupta serranía, acampado se encontraba un regimiento y una joven que valiente lo seguía, locamente enamorada de un sargento. Popular entre la tropa era Delita, la mujer que el sargento idolatraba, porque a más de ser valiente era bonita, y hasta el mismo coronel la respetaba.
Y se oía que decía aquel que tanto la quería.
Si Adelita se fuera con otro, la seguiría por tierra y por mar. Si por mar en un buque de guerra, si por tierra en un tren militar.
So you got the sense of the rhythm, the instrumentation of the song. So some of those songs were developed at the time, and there was a composer, female composer, well, we don't know too much about her, but her name was Concha Michel. And Concha Michel was a songwriter, a poet, an activist, and she wrote many songs that were kind of denouncing the terrible conditions of people, children, women under the Porfiriato years and how they were, becoming more part of a society. Interestingly enough, she was friends with Frida Kahlo, and this is a very interesting picture, beautiful picture of Frida Kahlo here with Concha Michel in Frida's neighborhood, Coyoacan, having a party and a gathering. I have the song of Concha Michel, but I can't play it. So, who was Frida Kahlo? So Frida Kahlo was a woman who was born in a middle-class family, what we call mestizo family, because her father was European and from German descent, and her mother was Mexican from Oaxaca. And she had a very interesting way of thinking about her family, and she represented that in her art. She always emphasized the value and the richness of that mixture of cultures and legacies, like in this painting where we see her in the middle with her parents and then two sets of grandparents coming from different parts of the world. She also had sisters, 3 sisters, and she was, a very active child, but she got polio when she was around 6 years old. And she became a young woman who was very interested in many things, in studying languages, medicine, music. And she went to one of the most important high schools in Mexico City, the main high school at the time, Preparatoria 1. Frida was growing up in an environment where the messages for women were several and complicated and diverse. So first of all, they have the message of the indigenous cultures and women. Second, this new possibility of being a woman like Adelita, revolutionary women. But they also had Catholicism as a very powerful source and influence to shape their lives like they shape Frida's mother's life. And then they also have the influence of the US in the 20s, the flappers, with the Charleston and all the new culture that was being evolving here and was traveling certainly to the US. I have the sound for the Charleston, but you know how it sounds. So Frida, within all this influence, was very innovative, and she wanted to explore her identity outside her family staff, right? The script of her family. So she cross-dressed sometimes like a man, and if we analyze her way of dressing, that we're not going to do, but I'm just giving you some examples, you can see that she would use clothing also as an important part of her identity and to state who she was. So she was in the preparatory 1. She was starting to be a painter and very motivated one when another event happened. It was a terrible accident. She was traveling in a bus one time, and this is a painting called The Bus by Frida Kahlo that reminds her of that day. And there was an issue with a trolley where the bus and the trolley crashed, and the bus got totally, mostly destroyed, and she was terribly injured in her back, her womb, and this is a sketch of drawing of that terrible accident. After that, she was confined in bed for a good period of time. And although she was able then, after a while, to recover and walk and move around, that accident, eventually the injuries became worse and worse, and she died. But in the meantime, the years that she had alive, she decided to become active and creative. And she decided to keep exploring painting and creating new possibilities. And painting became a life-saving staff for Frida. This is a picture of her studio. You can see the wheelchair, a canvas, a set of paintings and materials. And if you go to Frida's house now, you can see it as it is. So Frida became very powerful painter because she was not afraid of painting from the inside also in terms of her own physical pain. We'll talk about the emotional pain in a little bit. So these two paintings are, striking, bold, powerful. She's not hiding anything from her body. She's presenting her body fully and all the injuries that she had at the time. Now, to illustrate and to put some music into this stage of her life, of this event, I chose the music of Julian Carrillo, who at the time was exploring microtonal music in Mexico. And I know that microtonal is not exclusively, it comes from other parts of the world, but mainly India, if maybe the experts here can correct me. But let me show you an example of how that microtonal sounds for Mexico. So let me. And the trade was what he called sonido 13, sound 13, because he divided one tone in 13 microtones. And this is what you get here. I'm just trying to see where. Este? I just want to make sure that is the one that. Okay, let's see. So, okay. Let me show you this one. Talking about Colón, trying to find the sugar. So you can probably hear the different microtones here. So you have a sense of this, new exploration that Julian Carrillo was doing with this kind of music in the Mexican context. But then Frida had a second accident, and this was Diego. And Frida herself said There have been two great accidents in my life. One was the trolley and the other was Diego. Diego was by far the worst. And Frida and Diego had a very complicated, complicated story. Yeah, very passionate, very interesting and intense, right? And they were very different, but they were also very close. And they were able to collaborate and to inform their lives in very particular ways, not always happy, but certainly gave Frida a lot of material to create and to think about what to do with that emotional pain. And I want to also mention another singer and composer that was part of Frida's group of friends. Her name is Chabela Vargas. He was born in Costa Rica, but she said that she was Mexican. And she was really a powerful singer and wrote songs about, not only wrote, but also interpret songs from other composers that had to do with love and pain and passion and disappointment. So this song is called La Paloma or Paloma Negra. I'm going to leave the lyrics here while I look for the song so you can hear it and understand and appreciate a little bit more the painting of Frida there, because it's a powerful painting. And we can also hear the popular music in Mexico.
Ya me canso de llorar y no amanece. Ya no sé si maldecirte o por ti rezar. Tengo miedo de buscarte y de encontrarte. Donde me aseguran mis amigos que te vas. Hay momentos en que quisiera mejor rajarme y arrancarme ya los clavos de mi penar. Pero mis ojos se mueren sin mirar tus ojos y mi cariño con la aurora te vuelve a esperar. Y agarraste por tu cuenta la parranda. Paloma negra, ¿dónde andará? Ya no juegues con mi honra parrandera. Si tus caricias han de ser mías, de nadie más.
So you have a sense, and to fully appreciate the song, we need at least 2 tequilas. So we can really feel the Paloma Negra. Okay, good. So, but at the same time, when they were struggling with their relationship, there were happening so many things on the political and scene in Mexico. So after the Porfiriato and the revolution, Mexico was dealing with a key question. What was to be a Mexican? What was Mexicanidad? How could we define it? So there was a whole agenda, political and cultural, to try to define Mexicanidad. Three of the main players in these efforts were the three muralists, Diego Rivera, Frida's husband, José Clemente Orozco, and David Alfaro Siqueiros. The three of them were asked by the Minister of Culture, José Vasconcelos, to take on the walls of public buildings and spaces to represent a new narrative for Mexico. So they decided to do that, and if you go to Mexico City and other parts of the country, you can find these amazing murals with scenes that represent the indigenous, rescue the indigenous roots and cultural heritage, you know, from corn, Aztec, flowers, communities. Diego was part of the Communist Party, and he loved to represent scenes for workers and fight for workers' rights. We have Frida Kahlo here at the center, handling some arms, and others like José Clemente Orozco were concerned about the destruction that the revolution brought to Mexico. At the same time, the same agenda was being followed by Mexican musicians who were, trained in Europe. They knew popular music, they know indigenous heritage, but they were interested in putting everything together to give a new perspective on music. One of these main musicians was Carlos Chavez, friend of Diego and Frida, and what he did was to bring into the classical level, not just popular, but it was to bringing the popular into the circles of classical music, all the instruments that were part of indigenous cultures. So I'm going to play a little bit of Carlos Chavez Sinfonía India, so you can have an idea of how they did, or how he incorporated these instruments. Some kind of flute, ocarina. So you got a sense of this rhythm. But the musician that not only incorporated but integrated in very new ways all this legacy and heritage was Silvestre Revueltas. And I'm going to show you a video clip of what he wrote, his piece La Noche de los Mayas, the Night of the Mayas. Is actually music for a movie with the same name. And he did this symphony in four movements. I'm trying to find a performance with Alondra de la Parra, a Mexican director, that she does an amazing job with this performance, and I think it's worth watching just a little bit. And you can see the role of the instruments here. Of course, we have to have the advertisement. This is the four movement. And this is Paris Symphony. Everybody's doing good work there. And we have our Afro influence. So you can see here the variety of rhythms, instruments, new possibilities that Revueltas was bringing into the Mexican music scenario. In the four movement, it's called Noche del Encantamiento, and it's obviously available at YouTube if you want to watch it. At the same time, let me talk a little bit about women, because I have so far talked about 3 muralists, 2 musicians, male, but women were also contributing in very important way. Besides Chabela Vargas and Concha Michel, Frida had a group of friends, photographers, painters, that were also bringing to the foreground a narrative that had been hidden before. So let me show you some examples of the photos of Tina Modotti, Italian photographer that was very interested in taking pictures and record of a Mexico that was not the elite Mexico. It was a poor, the working class, again, an emphasis on cultural heritage. Lola Alvarez Bravo, also very centered in urban environments, but also innovating with photo montage and new techniques to represent the realities of Mexican children and women in general. Aurora Reyes was actually the first female muralist in Mexico, but we know very little about her, and mainly because they were pushed aside by the main three male muralists. But she created murals that were also speaking to important parts of our culture and heritage. Maria Izquierdo, some people consider her even more powerful than Frida Kahlo because she's also bringing into mainstream painting themes of popular culture, like this altar from home, and this painting that the horses, I found it very powerful. It's called Zapata. Zapata is one of the caudillos from the revolution. Diego Rivera, most painters present him alive with his horse, ready for battle or surrounded by campesinos. But Maria Izquierdo decided to represent his grave and his two horses side by side in a message of, sadness, loss, and grievance for these men. Women were also talking about very personal themes that were not part of a political ideology, infant deaths that are part of some of women's lives, and also gender violence. And it's interesting because you notice a kind almost like a joke, right? This painting here by Frida Kahlo, it's called A Few Small Nips, and it's almost funny and tragic because they are not few and they're not small. Some people think that this is inspired by the relationship between Frida and Diego, but what happened was that Frida read in a newspaper a news of the murder of this woman, and they took the husband to, the trail or whatever, and he was so surprised about the reaction and overreaction of people because after all, it was just a few small nips. So Frida took that tragic event to represent, something that was going on and it was very wrong in our culture. This totally disconnect between what men were thinking and the treatment of women. So the coda for the long song, not without complications. I want to show you some pictures of Frida's painting as a way to represent a polyphony of images and possibilities that she gave Mexican and Mexican art. From tradition, very European portrait, to incorporating to that same tradition new themes of nature that is so important in our indigenous cultures, indigenous communities. And this is typical dress of women in Oaxaca. Her native, the mother was native from Oaxaca. Friendship, because those earrings that you see in a shape of hand were a gift from Pablo Picasso, who was close friends with them. Of course, love and pain, and border. Leo Blanco was talking about the political lines that divide our countries, and here we see Frida in the middle of a political line, bringing together these two perspectives from the US when she was in Detroit in 1932 and Mexico, and she's at the middle, right? So what does that mean for a woman like Frida and for Mexicans in general. And I want to end this talk with this painting and a song. I still have 2 minutes to play, that it's called La Llorona. It's one of the most traditional songs in Mexico, also interpreted by Chabela Vargas. And I'm going to leave this image here to appreciate the richness of Frida's work, that in one painting, she can bring in history, indigenous communities, our history of mestizaje, the union of indigenous and European cultures, pain, the inner her that is suffering, because this painting was done after she divorced from Diego.
No sé qué tienen las flores, llorona, las flores del camposanto. No sé qué tienen las flores, llorona, las flores del camposanto, que cuando las mueve el viento, llorona, parece que están llorando.
So La Llorona is a weeping woman. And the origins of the song, we can trace them to the pre-Hispanic tradition, where before the conquest, there were some omens, some signals that something terrible was coming. And one of the omens was a woman weeping in the streets, wandering in Mexico City, the center, saying, my children, what's coming, right? So that became, because there was this premonition that destruction and death was about to happen in the Aztec Empire. So some people in the revolution took this legend and transformed it into a song, and then it has taken it life on its own, because there are so many different versions and lyrics that we really don't know much about, the true origins of the song, but it's very popular and it's a beautiful song. And with this, I'm going to end my talk and open floor for questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Parra. Are there any questions? Please come up to the mic.
This is not a question, just a comment. This beautiful song, actually, for all the jazz fans and jazz saxophonists, Charles Lloyd recorded this song twice in the I Long to See You and Mirror Mirror, and I really suggest for you to listen. Both versions are beautiful. Anyway, beautiful presentation. Thank you so much.
Any other questions?
I think it might have been implied, but what did Diego do to Frida?
So that's a great question, actually, because we talked about pain and the accident. And okay, so actually, what he did was that he was not faithful at all, and he even got to have an affair with Frida's sister. That doesn't mean that Frida didn't have affairs. So they were both in a, that's what I say, a complicated relationship, but it was mainly being unfaithful. But he was a great supporter of her work, and she considered him his friend, his mentor, a teacher. So it was much more than infidelity that really defined their relationship. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for the presentation. Can you talk a little bit about the movement that you represented in terms of political and also the Chicanos
Right. Well, this is another interesting question because Frida Kahlo has become a symbol in very recent years, a symbol of feminism, inclusion, immigration, if you want to call it like that. In Mexico City, when I was growing up, we knew about Frida, but it was not Frida Mania time like it is today, right? So I think that the fact that you have a book by a biography that is very well known by Hayden Herrera, the movie with Salma Hayek, that projected the name of Frida Kahlo to a different level. And then people have become very interested about who she is. I teach a class on Frida Kahlo at Harvard Extension School, and I have students from all over the world, from different ages, and they're really intrigued by the personal story, the artistic implications and history in general. So I think that the meaning of Frida is in the making, it's evolving, and now is seen as a figure of inclusion. She came to the US and she didn't like it that much. She was very concerned with the process of, globalization, industrialization at the time, and the impact on that on people and workers' rights. And in that, in this painting here, if you observe, she is highlighting Detroit, the Ford industry at the time. There was a strike. It was 1932. It was a strike of workers. Actually, there was some kind of killing of workers. The smoke. There's no human life on that side, and she was concerned with that. It was a message for, At the same time, you can see the Mexican side. You have the flowers, the roots, the history, the cosmovision. When I work with my students with this painting, I always try to point out that probably you can't see it because of the light here, but we have the roots of the plants, and here we have cables from all these artifacts, and they are connecting underground. So is there any meaning on that connection underground that was starting to happen in terms of industrialization, the US coming into Latin America through technology, through progress, but it was not evident. So that's one interpretation, but I think that at the time there was not that, Frida was not the centerpiece in political terms as Diego was, but she has become a central figure now for inclusion, yeah.
Well, first of all, congratulations, a great presentation.
Thank you.
And I just want more a comment than a question that something of what you say link a little bit of what I was talking about with the hiring of muralists
Right.
and the musicians coming back. That's what I meant with national identity agenda from the nations. And maybe I'm mistaken, I didn't see it, but in all the murals, there's no black people either. So there's
Right.
a little bit of what I'm saying about national identity, of portraying the indigenous heritage and leaving out the blacks.
And I think that's a great point, because right now that's a discussion that is happening in Mexico. This idea of mestizaje, it was not just between Europeans and indigenous. There were Afro-descendants, even some Asian groups. So all that is, a field that is being explored in Mexico as we speak. So thank you for the comment. Yep. Thank you for one more.
Do we have time for one more question? Great.
It's not a question, it's more like a comment. Just, I didn't know anything about Frida Kahlo until I went to see her exhibition at the MFA here in Boston last semester. And I clearly noticed that she has a very huge emotional impact in her works. And it was just very interesting for me to see what's behind, what's creating this background. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, you have the last question. Oh, I closed the presentation, sorry.
Last question.
Question.
We were just in Detroit a couple of weeks ago, and one of the workers from the Detroit Jazz Festival was telling us that they are very proud that Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo went to Detroit at the time, I think it was in the 1920s, and did all of these murals, which are beautiful murals, where he said that the workers from the plants stay there watching at Diego Rivera and hanging out with Frida Kahlo because they wanted to make sure that the workers would be represented in those paintings.
That's right.
So I wanted to, ask Diego Rivera painted and represented a bigger political, more universal struggle. How did Frida represented a bigger political struggle outside of Mexico? That's my question. How did she do it, and who were the people that she connected with?
In Detroit?
No, outside of, not only Detroit, but outside of Mexico, in different parts of the world.
So, because at the time there were so many historical events happening, and because they were part of the Communist Party and Mexico was such a hub of change, they had connections all over the world. They were friends with Trotsky, that actually Diego Rivera asked Presidente Cárdenas for permission to bring Trotsky to Mexico, and they were close friends. Frida and Trotsky had an affair. They were friends with Picasso. They were, they were very involved in the Spanish Civil War. Actually, I think Siqueiros, one of the muralists, fought in the Spanish Civil War, but I'm not quite sure about that. They were friends with Breton and the Surrealist movement. Breton also went to Mexico, and when he saw Frida's work, he said that Frida was a surrealist artist. And Frida said, no, I'm not a surrealist, because surrealism at the time was following the new proposals for Freud's theory of the unconscious. So surrealists were dealing with how do you bring to the surface your unconscious, meaning fears, desires, instincts, right? But Frida's painting was about her own inner story, and she didn't consider that surrealist. However, we do have some kind of surreal cultural framework when we think about El Día de los Muertos, because we're going to another world, right? In any case, so it was Trotsky, Picasso, Breton, and the US, of course, the US, right? They were friends with many people here. So did that answer your question, Patricia? Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Parra. We are now going to break for lunch, and we'll be back to listen to more insightful information from our panelists. So we'll be back very soon. Thank you. Also, lunch is provided outside, right outside the door, and pizza.